It was supposed to be an easy job, a remote, isolated prison in the middle of nowhere, far from any town or city. I didn't think much of it when they offered me the position as a new night guard. To be honest, I was just happy to have the job. I was young, still trying to find my place in the world, and this job seemed like a fresh start. They said I would be overseeing the inmates' night shifts, ensuring things ran smoothly while the rest of the staff took a break. I didn't think it would be anything extraordinary, but I was wrong. The prison itself was old, so old that it felt like it had seen more horror than any of the inmates that walked through its cold, gray halls. It was tucked away in the mountains, surrounded by dense forest, cut off from the rest of civilization. The air was thick with an eerie stillness, as though the place had been forgotten by time itself. The walls were tall, draped with vines and decay. The entire prison seemed to scream of neglect, but that wasn't the strangest part. No, the strangest part was what they told me before my first shift: the rules. At first I thought they were just being overly cautious, like those quirky safety instructions at the start of a job. But no, these rules, they felt different, as if there was something more to them, something hidden beneath the surface. They told me that I wasn't allowed to leave the guard station after dark, not for anything. If I needed a break, I could use the restroom in the station, but nothing else, not even a step outside. I wasn't supposed to make eye contact with the prisoners unless it was absolutely necessary. If they spoke to me, I could answer, but nothing more. And the most bizarre rule of all, never, under any circumstances, was I allowed to enter cell 13. I was told that the cell had been sealed off for years, its contents classified, and it was to remain that way. If I saw anyone trying to approach the cell, I was to report it immediately. That was the rule. At first, I didn't take it seriously. A little paranoia, I thought. After all, it was just a prison. They must have had their reasons for making these strange rules. But as the days went on, those rules began to feel more like a warning. Something was off. The first night I walked into the prison, the heavy doors creaked open with a groan that echoed through the empty halls. I was greeted by the cold, dim light flickering above me. The walls seemed to close in as I passed through the narrow corridors. It felt like the prison was watching me, breathing with me, like it had a life of its own. The first guard I met, a grizzled man with a permanent scowl, looked at me with eyes that seemed to see through me. He barely said a word, just pointed me to the security booth where I would be stationed and handed me a thick set of keys. "Don't break the rules," he said, "the ones they tell you about. They're there for a reason, and don't ask too many questions. Just do your job." He walked away without another glance, disappearing into the darkness. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I shrugged it off, trying to focus on the task at hand. As I walked into the security booth, I noticed the faint buzzing of the old fluorescent lights above me. The room smelled faintly of mildew and old paper. The walls were lined with monitors, each showing a different angle of the prison. The guards had set me up with all the tools I needed to do my job, but there was an unease in the air that I couldn't shake. I took a seat at the control panel, glancing over at the monitor that displayed cell 13. It was dark, the camera feed showing only the faint outline of the cell door. I had been warned not to look at it for too long, but my curiosity got the better of me. I found my eyes drawn to the camera feed, unable to look away. I couldn't explain why, but something about that cell felt wrong. The hours passed slowly. The hum of the machines and the occasional shuffle of guards in the distance made up the majority of the sound. There were no loud outbursts, no desperate cries, just a quiet, eerie stillness that seemed to pervade the entire place. I began to wonder about the prisoners. I knew their crimes, of course. The place housed some of the most dangerous people in the country. Murderers, gang leaders, the worst of the worst. But I couldn't help but feel like there was something more to them, something unsettling. Their eyes, the way they looked at me when I passed by the cells, almost as if they knew something I didn't. Then came the first strange occurrence. Around midnight, I heard a soft tapping on the glass in front of me. At first, I thought it was a rat or some other small animal, but when I looked up, I saw the face of a prisoner pressed against the window. His eyes were wide, panicked, and his mouth moved as if he was trying to say something. I leaned in closer, but there was no sound. The prison was too silent. I felt my pulse quicken as I stared at him, unable to look away. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the prisoner backed away from the window, vanishing into the shadows. I sat back in my chair, trying to shake off the chill that had settled over me. It was then that I remembered the rules again, the rules that I had been warned about. Don't make eye contact with the prisoners unless you have to. I couldn't help but feel that something was terribly wrong here, something that went beyond the usual prison politics and dark secrets. And I was starting to believe that the rules were more than just precautions. They were meant to keep something locked away.
The next morning, I was tasked with my first full shift as a night guard. It was strange, really. The place felt more like a graveyard than a prison. A few guards walked past me as I made my way through the compound, their eyes downcast, not meeting mine. It was as if they didn't want to be seen, or perhaps they didn't want to see me. As I wandered deeper into the prison, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The walls seemed to stretch on forever, and the prison's layout was a maze. I found myself walking through narrow corridors, past rows of locked cells that held men whose faces I didn't recognize. Their eyes followed me as I passed, but they never spoke. It felt like they were waiting for something, but I had no idea what. The walls of the prison were cold, made of old stone that seemed to swallow any sound. Even my footsteps echoed unnervingly loud in the quiet. A faint smell of decay lingered in the air, a mix of old, stale concrete and something else I couldn't quite place. It was like the prison had been here for centuries, slowly decaying with each passing year, and now it had just given up on being anything more than a hollow shell. I finally made my way to the guard's office, which was small and dimly lit. A senior guard named Rick was sitting behind the desk. He was an older man, his face weathered with years of experience. He looked up at me when I walked in, his tired eyes studying me for a long moment. "You're new, huh?" Rick asked gruffly. His voice was thick with the kind of exhaustion only years of working in a place like this could bring. "Yeah, first day," I replied, trying to sound confident. He nodded slowly, as though he already knew how this was going to go. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice. "This place isn't like the others. You're not here to be nice, and you're sure as hell not here to be a hero. Keep your head down, do your job, and don't ask too many questions. The rules are there for a reason, and the sooner you realize that, the better." Rick's warning hung in the air like a thick fog. I didn't quite understand it at the time, but something about the way he said it made me feel like I was walking into something far darker than I could imagine. He handed me a set of keys and pointed me to the security booth where I would be stationed for my shift. "You'll be alone at night. You'll monitor the cells, make sure everything is in order. If you see anything strange, report it. And whatever you do, don't go near cell 13. That's the one rule you don't break. Got it?" I nodded, though I couldn't help but wonder what made that particular cell so special. As I made my way to the security booth, I noticed something odd. There were no other staff members around. The place felt empty, even though it was far from it. The few guards I did see walked with their heads down, avoiding eye contact. The inmates were quiet, too quiet. Some of them were sitting in their cells, staring at the walls, while others paced back and forth in eerie silence. I sat down in the security booth, which was cramped and dimly lit. It felt like I was watching over a tomb. The monitors flickered to life, showing different angles of the prison. I was in charge of overseeing everything that happened here, but as I looked at the monitors, I felt more like I was trapped in a cage with them. The first few hours were uneventful, but the silence gnawed at me. Every so often I heard strange noises in the distance, footsteps that seemed to echo in the hallways, whispers that sounded too far away to be real. But when I checked the cameras, there was nothing. It was like the prison was alive, shifting and breathing in the darkness, just waiting for something to happen. Around midnight, a low, almost imperceptible noise made me freeze. It was coming from cell 13. I'd been told not to look at it too much, but I couldn't help myself. I turned the camera feed to that cell and stared at it, waiting. Nothing. For a moment I thought I had imagined it. But then I heard it again, louder this time. A faint scratching sound, like fingernails dragging against metal. It sent a chill down my spine. I leaned forward in my chair, staring at the feed. The cell was still dark, but now I noticed something I hadn't before. A faint glow. It was almost imperceptible, like a faint light leaking from under the door. I quickly turned the camera to another cell, hoping I had just imagined it. But as I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I looked around the security booth, but there was no one there. I felt my heartbeat quicken as I scanned the rest of the monitors. The silence in the prison was suffocating. Suddenly, the lights in the booth flickered. Once, twice, then they went out completely. The monitor screens went black, and I was left in total darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I fumbled for the emergency flashlight. When the light flickered back on, I was met with a face staring at me through the glass. The prisoner from cell 13. His eyes were wide, wild with fear, and his mouth was moving, though I couldn't hear anything. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched him, unable to look away. The man's eyes seemed to plead with me, but there was something else. Something darker. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. I blinked and looked at the monitor again. The cell was empty. The camera feed showed nothing but the empty, dark room. I sat there, my mind racing. I had been told not to make eye contact with the prisoners, but I had just broken that rule. What had I just seen, and why had that man looked at me like that? The strange rules. They weren't just for the safety of the inmates. They were there for my safety too. And I was starting to think that breaking them might be a mistake I couldn't undo.